What's up? Welcome to another episode of Bitches Love Sports. This is going to be a really, really short one because I don't know if you can tell. I'm in my trainer clothes and I got clients to go train. But I wanted to do this real quick because news has come out today. I haven't gone live this week. There's other stuff that I need to record. So I'm like, let me go ahead and do this, talk to you guys for a little bit. And from the comments in response to what I was saying on Twitter yesterday and this morning, sounds like a few of y'all have some comments in regards to some of the stuff that I'm gonna cover. So I was like, all right, let's knock this out before I go to work. So I won't hold y'all maybe 30, 45 minutes, depending on how the conversation goes. And then I'll get out of here. And if it's a really good conversation, I can always come back. So as always, I'm gonna start off with shout outs and call outs. I really only have one shout out real quick before we get into some Cowboys related stuff that I wish I didn't have to talk about. But that shout out goes to Coco Gauff. Coco Gauff, what is it? Thursday? I was about to say last night, but it was this morning. At 2:30 this morning, Coco Gauff was in the semifinals for the Australian Open. She was eliminated by Sabalenka, who she defeated in the US Open in September. But despite the elimination, she's actually showing a lot of promise in her career. Like when it comes to American tennis, Coco Gauff is one of the people who's definitely giving the American tennis community something to be proud of. And considering the way people thought, like, once Serena Williams left the tennis scene, that was just going to be it for Black women in tennis, I'm really happy to see Coco Gauff come up, improve the way she's improved, and pave her own trail. A lot of people try to compare her to Serena. And I get the comparison. Like, one, we can't help but look at race, right? So it's like, oh, it's another Black woman tennis player who's really good. Like, let's see how she compares to Serena. But it's also the fact that, she's doing some really cool stuff in her career that honestly, if it weren't for the fact that Serena or Venus had done these things before, she would literally be blazing trails. So, for example, when she got to the final round of the US Open, she was the youngest player at age 19. She was the youngest player to do that since Serena Williams did it when she was 17. That was back in 1999. So that's just like one example. As she keeps getting better, she keeps improving, advancing, and going to more and more Grand Slams. I'm sure there will be more and more comparisons and parallels. It's highly unlikely that she'll end up doing anything that Serena and Venus haven't already done. But the fact that, in some of these tournaments, she ends up being the last American standing in a sport where the country that you represent is so important, it's kind of a big deal. It's kind of a big deal. So I'm happy for her. I've seen her improve over the years, and even though she got eliminated and didn't walk away from this one as a champion, I still have to shout her out just because of what we've seen from her over the years. So that being said, let's get to the topic that if you are looking at this lovely list of topics to my right, this lovely list of topics to my right, I'm sure it's one that caught your attention. Let me read this comment real quick. Clement says, Coco Gauff is the only American tennis player doing anything of significance right now in tennis. Facts. No one will reach the hype of Serena Williams' ultimate winner. That's very possible. I won't say no one, because it's not impossible that someone will, but like it's gonna be hard. But like on the men's side, honestly, Clement, they've got some people who are doing some interesting things, but it's just like really inconsistent. Like, you'll hear about TFO for a few weeks, and then you'll hear about somebody else for a few weeks, and Coco Gauff is just the only American tennis player whose like name is consistently in the news. But like there are some men who are doing pretty good. JV, what's up? How's it going? So that being said, let's go ahead and hop into this next topic, which is Dallas Cowboys Family Matters. Okay. So if you, and not Family Matters, the show, obviously, but if you watch my last live, at the end of the live, someone brought up the topic of CeeDee Lamb's mom. At the time, I was not familiar with anything that was going on Twitter regarding comments from family members. I was paying attention to other stuff. I'm gonna get back to this comment in a second, JV. It's so hard for me to not read comments while I'm talking. But anyway, at the time of this last live, I was paying attention to other stuff. I was more so thinking about, what's going on with the coaching, what's going on with these players, what can we expect in terms of the future. As a matter of fact, it was brought up on the same day that I did my analysis of Mike McCarthy's end of season press conference. And at the end of the live, somebody was like, I don't remember the exact question, but they brought up CeeDee Lamb's mom. Someone DM'd me a post someone had made on Twitter with screenshots of what she said on Facebook. I put them live here on the show, and then I immediately regretted it. I don't think I told y'all that I regretted it, but I did. And the reason that I did was because it was one of those things that didn't really give us useful information, and I knew would end up leading to just like mess and drama. And I was like, not the kind of thing that I would normally want to cover, but whatever. It's out there. People are talking about it. It's kind of relevant. Now, what's happened since then is literally every day this week on Get Up, they have been talking about not only CeeDee Lamb's mom, but also Micah Parsons' brother and Dak Prescott's brother. And it's gone from, hey, here's what these people said, what does it mean, to, hey, how come no one is standing up for Dak Prescott? And you know what? Maybe Dak Prescott should just leave and go to another team. And so I wanted to address it, not so much to be like, oh, look at what they said and how terrible it is, but to kind of address the narratives that are surrounding the statements and that are coming up because of what these family members said. Clement says, as for the families of Dallas Cowboys players, I understand that you're protecting your son or brother, but it's part of the beast when you play for the Cowboys in that you will have idiotic fans. Clement, you couldn't be more right. And that is one of the reasons why I kind of expected Cowboys content creators to ignore it whenever it first came out. Not completely ignore it, right? Like, by all means, like, tweet about it, whatever, speak your piece, you know? But when it got to the point that entire YouTube shows were being dedicated to what was happening, I'm like, yo, fans often follow the lead of content creators, especially when it comes to what's discussed on Twitter and YouTube. And it just kind of felt like none of the information coming out about it was really helpful. So, but let's talk about what they said on Get Up, though, because honestly, what they were saying, people following that narrative could even be even more harmful. And some of it I felt was unfair to the players that they mentioned. So when they started talking about people not defending Dak Prescott, they're like, you know, these family members said XYZ. Why haven't any of these team members come out and said, no, we stand with Dak Prescott. We stand behind Dak Prescott. So I'm going to go one by one and say why Get Up was kind of off base with discussing that. So let's start off with the comment that seemed to kind of set this whole thing ablaze, which was a comment from CeeDee Lamb's mom. She essentially said, Dak ain't it. Somebody said something about CeeDee should go to Houston. She said, I wish he would, yada, yada, yada. So saying something like that obviously suggests you think CJ Stroud is better than Dak Prescott. You don't believe in Dak Prescott's ability to lead the team to success, and whatever else you might think about the culture of the Dallas Cowboys, et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't seem like CeeDee's mom is exactly a Dak supporter. But then when they started saying that, well, CeeDee should come out and say something, I was kind of like, that's really unfair, because CeeDee just simply doesn't do that. Even before people started talking about it on ESPN, I knew we would not hear from CeeDee Lamb regarding this matter, because that's not what he does. He does not like getting attention for that kind of thing. He doesn't like getting attention in the media, period. I don't know if y'all have ever noticed, but like when he does interviews, he doesn't usually look that happy about being asked a bunch of questions and being expected to answer them. Even sometimes when he can anticipate that a question is coming up, before it even gets asked, he'll tell the media he's not going to answer that. He'll be like, I know y'all about to ask me such and such, and I'm not going to tell y'all. Like, he does that. And even though he likes receiving accolades in the sense that he likes being recognized for the improvement in his game, like he came into the league telling us that he wanted to be an elite receiver. So of course he appreciates when people acknowledge that he is developing into that, right? He puts a lot of work into his game. Every single offseason, throughout the season, you can track it from his very first training camp, right? But even with stuff like that, he just doesn't like making headlines. He doesn't like being the center of attention. He definitely doesn't like being the center of drama. So to expect CeeDee Lamb to all of a sudden say something because his mom made this statement is just really unfair. It doesn't really make sense based on who CeeDee Lamb is. And I feel like if you pay attention to who CeeDee Lamb is, you kind of know just because he didn't say anything doesn't mean that he doesn't support Dak. It doesn't mean that he doesn't love Dak or respect Dak. Now, I'm not saying that he necessarily does. I'm saying that his silence doesn't tell you anything because that's who he is. Now, the next person I want to address is Tad. when it comes to Tad and Dak, Tad saying I would get Dak out of here if I could, that is business as usual for them. There's really not much to speak on because Tad has been active on social media for a long time. He said things that have gotten a lot more coverage than him saying that he would get Dak out of Dallas if he could. And the fact that he feels that way isn't really surprising. Like, he's talked about how much he cares about his brother. And I think any of us who have siblings or anybody that we care about, if you see what's happening with Dak Prescott, and people have even talked about it just from a fan perspective, like, dang, it looks like he deals with a lot of bullshit. So you can only imagine that a member of his family might be like, you know what? If there were some way for him to not have to deal with this drama all the time and not be talked about this way all the time and actually get the respect that he deserves, I would make that happen. So once again, Tad's statement, not surprising. I don't really feel a way about it. The two people who confused me were Micah and Terrence Parsons. And they confused me for two different reasons. So I'm going to start with Micah first because they were like, why hasn't Micah come out and said, I support Dak? He made a statement saying, I love all my teammates. He did not mention Dak Prescott specifically, even though his brother mentioned Dak Prescott specifically. That I understood because Micah Parsons is known for speaking his mind. As a matter of fact, in the tweet where he said, well, I love all my teammates, he said, if I had something to say, I would say it. And this is true. In the past, Micah Parsons has not had a problem with saying whatever he needed to say and mentioning people by name and putting out multiple tweets and addressing topics in detail. So I can see people kind of, looking sideways at Micah when he doesn't address Dak by name and when he doesn't speak on the situation in detail and he isn't very explicit in his support of Dak Prescott. I totally get it. But once again, it's really hard to say what you can really glean from that. And with any of these situations, I don't really think we'll know the truth or any facts or what it all means, maybe until training camp. I feel like there's a lot that has to be sorted out and a lot of feelings that have to be sorted through and a lot of things that have to happen before we actually get a true understanding of how the way this last postseason ended is going to impact this team and impact the locker room and impact the organization. But I will say, out of all the statements from family members, when it comes to questioning anybody who didn't come out in support of Dak Prescott, I would say Micah's probably the only person who I really feel like deserves to be questioned because of that. And when it comes to Terrence Parsons, the reason why he confused me, and this is saying, like, I had never really heard anything about Terrence Parsons, or I didn't know anything about him before this whole situation blew up. So it's not like I have as much of a beat on what he would or wouldn't say or normally does say as I do on some of the players that I've been paying attention to for years, right? But the thing that was confusing about Terrence is that he, in his original tweet that was getting criticism, said that Dak needs to take a team-friendly deal and that he should, quote, accept $40 million or pack your bags. Now, he came back and said, and I'm scrolling through to find it because it was something that I actually ended up responding to. Oh, he came back, and this was yesterday. He said, I think people should watch my podcast before they put words in my mouth. I think I'm one of the biggest Dak supporters there are, but the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing, expecting a different result. We all see Dak needs a team around him, a team-friendly deal. So I did respond to that on Twitter, and what I essentially said was, hey, a team-friendly deal doesn't mean $40 million. We see all the time how teams will manipulate contracts, manipulate numbers just to make sure that they can pay their star players without completely destroying their cap space. So for you to say, take $40 million or pack your bags, suggests that you don't think that Dak deserves to be paid as one of the top quarterbacks in the league, and that you really think that the team would be better off without him. You would rather see him leave than to see him get paid. Like, nobody's putting words in your mouth. They're literally reading what you said. But since then, he made this statement about watch my podcast before you put words in my mouth. He's also made some other posts that are suggesting that he's very supportive of Dak. He never really did clarify why he specified 40 million or why he threw on a statement like pack your bags for someone that he says that he supports and thinks that the team actually needs in order to see success. So I don't really get it. I don't understand what his angle is unless it is just to get attention, to get engagement. And maybe once he realized that that whole idea of telling Dak to get the hell out of Dallas was less popular than he realized, maybe he just tried to change course a little bit. I don't know. But I know if I was Dak and I saw somebody say, "Hey, take 40 million and pack your bags," I wouldn't be like, "Oh, that's one of my biggest supporters." Like, no, I'd be like, "Oh, you hate me and I don't know why." Cool. Um, but yeah, he's made a few posts and retweeted some things in support of Dak. So I don't know. That's all I can go on right now. But then today, he even started making posts about the fact that Dan Quinn should leave Dallas. So now he's anti Dan Quinn as well, perhaps. Um, so JV said, I honestly never knew he existed. I didn't either. And you know what's so funny is when I was trying to find out more about this situation, I was texting someone and I was like, who is Micah Parsons' brother? And the person was like, "How do you not know who Micah Parsons' brother is?" And I'm like, "Well, how would I know?" And they're like, "He has a podcast." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know anything about that either." So I went on Google and I found out who he was. And then from there, I found him on Twitter. And then I texted the person back and I was like, "Never mind, I found him." And the person was like, "See, all you had to do was try." And I was like, "Well, how was I supposed to ever do that? Y'all don't even call this man by his name. Y'all ain't never called this man Terrence. All I ever hear is Micah Parsons' brother." Like, what? Had it not been for the detail of him having a podcast, I don't even think Google would have really helped me. Maybe, maybe not. But I'm with you, JV. I didn't know he existed. So maybe this whole situation is playing out for him exactly how he wants it to. Um, Clemens said in an article that came out today, that Troy Aikman believes that Dak can win the Super Bowl with Dallas. The players are worried about stats and the fame instead of playing for the standard that was placed before them. Gotcha. That's interesting coming from Troy Aikman, especially that insight about what players are worried about. And I'd be curious to know where he got that perspective from. So I saw the video where Troy Aikman was talking about the fact that he believed in Dak, but this part about him saying that players are worried about stats and fame, that part I hadn't heard yet. It doesn't necessarily surprise me, mainly because I like studying athletes. I like studying the culture of sports. I like studying the mindset of champions. And I have watched several interviews of players who are either retired from the league or who have, been in the league for a long time. And they do talk about how they had to have a mindset shift in order to achieve success. Michael Vick is one of the people who comes to mind in the interview that he did with, I want to say it was the interview that Michael Vick did with The Pivot, where he talked about how when he first got into the league, he himself was worried about stats, not stats specifically, but he was worried about proving who he was as a player, which involved, for him as a quarterback, which involved him getting certain stats. Like, he felt like he had to prove himself. And it wasn't until later in his career that he really started taking the responsibility of getting his team a championship seriously. And around the time when he made that mindset shift was around the time that he got into all that legal trouble. So he never really got to play with that new mindset. And I've just heard other interviews from other people who talk about going from being so worried about them and their own performance to being like, well, now that I have the reputation and I have the stats, now I wish I had the ring to go with it. So yeah, I've heard from some of the stars who are, not as new to the league that is a thing that can happen. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me. And I also think that Troy Aikman is one of those people who, if he says something, he's not being flippant about it. Like, if he says something like that, he got it from somewhere. He's not so irresponsible that he would just say something like that and make it up. So I don't know where he got it from, but if he said it, it's based on something. It's based on something legitimate. I think so. So I guess we'll just have to see. When I was doing my analysis of Mike McCarthy's end of season press conference, one of the main things, and I don't think I stated this explicitly whenever I was doing that live, but one of the main things that bothered me was the fact that Mike McCarthy just didn't even seem to take accountability himself, and I thought about this morning when I was watching Will Still's show, and I don't remember what he was discussing. I know the show this morning was about free agents. but I don't remember what the exact topic was that made me think about this specific thing. I think it might have been one of the callers calling in and talking about how they were still trying to get over the loss. But it just kind of made me think about some of the statements that have come out from the organization and the actions that they have, or I should say, haven't taken since the loss. Um, and so, starting with Mike McCarthy's press conference, he, like I said in the live, he never really seemed like he was concerned about his job being in jeopardy. Like, he never really seemed concerned about the consequences of such a bad loss. But he also never talked about being disappointed in himself. He never referred to himself as having underperformed. Like, you never heard him say anything like, "Man, I really let down the team. I really let down the fan base." Nothing suggesting that there was any sort of remorse or regret or any idea that anything even needed to change. And that's the thing that I think is getting to a lot of people. I think that's the thing that leads people to even being worried about Dan Quinn, because if you have new blood coming in, at least there's a chance that someone might come in and instill a philosophy somewhere that could lead to a change that would get you different results. But I think when people look at the team and they see them not making any kind of coaching moves despite the plethora of coaching talent that's out there, not talking about holding Mike McCarthy accountable, not talking about anything they wish they had done differently. Mike McCarthy was up there. He's like, I was shocked. I was surprised. And it's like, well, we were shocked and surprised because we're fans. And of course, maybe you're shocked and surprised by some things, but we need to hear something to know that you're taking the situation seriously and that you're taking accountability and that you're going to do something for things to be different. And that just hasn't come down from the organization on any level. So, um, yeah, that's where a lot of people are. And then just before I got ready to go live, I was listening to something and they were talking about the fact that there are only two coaching positions left, head coaching positions, and that's for the Washington Commanders and the Seattle Seahawks. And apparently, Dan Quinn has his second interview scheduled with both of those teams. And so we'll kind of have to wait and see what happens. But I'll say this. I think when an organization has an actual plan, they don't sit around waiting to see what somebody like Dan Quinn is going to do. They go ahead and make a decision. They say, hey, this is what the team needs. We're going to make these moves to make sure that the team gets what it needs. Because whenever you sit and wait, it suggests that you're probably sitting and waiting to come up with a plan. It suggests that you're probably sitting and waiting to come up with a direction. And that just doesn't sit well with me, considering all the things that go into transforming a team and making it a championship team. So I don't know. We might be in for a long season in 2024. We'll have to see what happens. But so far, I'm just really not comfortable with it, the way the organization's been dragging its feet. But you never know. There's still time. Changes can be made. Moves can be made. We'll have to see. It's not like there's anything I can actually do about it. But moving on from that to the next topic, and if y'all have anything to add regarding any of that, of course, feel free to put it in the comments. But moving on to that, I just want to give a quick shout out to all the Cowboys who were nominated for AP awards. So the AP awards are all the ones that we hear about throughout the season that people start trying to predict as early as September. But MVP, Coach of the Year, Assistant Coach of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, so on and so forth. Those are the AP awards. They're voted on by writers. And 4 different Cowboys were nominated for AP awards. So Dak Prescott is a finalist for MVP, well deserved, especially considering it's a regular season award. For Offensive Player of the Year, both Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb are nominated. And then for Defensive Player of the Year, Deron Bland and Micah Parsons were nominated. So that's it. There are some Rookie of the Year categories and Coach of the Year categories. We didn't have anybody in those. But those are the nominations that we did get. What's up, Eastside Herald? How many Texans were nominated? That's a good question. I can look real quick. Let me see. Let's see. D'Amico Ryans was nominated for Coach of the Year. Well deserved. Bobby Slowick was nominated for Assistant Coach of the Year. CJ Stroud was nominated for Offensive Rookie of the Year. And Will Anderson was nominated for Defensive Rookie of the Year. So, congrats to the Houston Texans. Way to go. Congrats, Eastside. JV, you are so mean. All right. JV said, remember Jerry Jones sitting and waiting for teams to call him before the trade deadline? Yes, I do. Considering that, and also considering, I don't want to say what came out from Brian Broaddus this week because he put a spotlight on it, but honestly, what Brian Broaddus said is something that I had heard other people say about the organization before. But shout out to Brian for saying it as fervently as he did and for being such a huge voice in the community to make people actually pay attention. But it really suggests that comfort is more important to the organization than actually getting wins. That if them becoming a championship team means them having to change their involvement with the team or having to, really get creative when it comes to how they structure contracts or spend money, or even bringing somebody in who might be a better GM or something of that nature. They're really not down to do it. They're not really down to make the drastic and much needed moves that would actually take them to that next level. And so you just kind of have to, every fan has to decide on their own how they're going to respond to that, Accountability and toughness, the Detroit Lions. Seeing teams like the Lions and even teams like the Texans and the Raiders, even though the Raiders didn't have the best record, but just seeing the kind of improvement that can be made when you have a coach who brings a culture of toughness and who seems tough themselves, seeing the kind of difference that can make really made me wonder what the Cowboys would look like if they had a coach like that. And I think the current organizational leadership is not really a fan of that type of coach. It doesn't really fit the Cowboys brand, right? But it's just like when you see these coaches who come in and they go into press conferences talking about biting people's kneecaps, talking about violence and ill intent, like with the Raiders, talking about how, they want to be physical and, really take it to the opposition, and just seeing how quickly those teams tend to make a turnaround and improve and you see a difference, it really just kind of makes you wonder, like, man. Clement says, the Dallas Cowboys are a team of individuals led by the organization, enabling the players to do whatever they want. You have some strong opinions. No structure, accountability, unity, toughness. It's a simple structure. Okay, so that was the beginning of your statement about the Detroit Lions. Yeah, I can't really disagree with that at this point. I think the biggest question is, are they going to change that, and what's going to happen to change that? We already know Mike McCarthy is coming back. It seems likely that Dan Quinn is coming back. As a matter of fact, it's very possible that since I've been live that's been announced, because I'm seeing various things on Twitter and I can't tell if people are speculating or if it's actually a fact that he's officially coming back. But the last thing that I read was that he had 2 interviews left. So that's what I'm going with right now. Okay, let me get through the rest of this so I can make sure I'm not late for work. Just a couple things to cover. So the next thing up is related to some of the causes that the NFL is associated with. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. The main reason that I'm highlighting it is because sometimes, especially during the regular season, when things start to happen and there are agreements made with certain brands like Amazon, people are like, why is this happening? Why are they doing this to the players? Why are the players beholden to do X, Y, Z? Like with the whole Amazon Prime possibility of the flex games thing, people are like, why would they make players do that? And it's like, well, because their agreement with Amazon has way more to do with all of their agreements put together than just broadcasting. Like the NFL works with Amazon on all sorts of things related to technological innovations for the sport, player health and safety, grants that they've given out, studies that they've actually done regarding just recovery modalities for players, health and safety, equipment, things of that nature. So if Amazon doesn't get some semblance of what they want, it affects a lot more than Thursday Night Football is what I'm saying. And so the reason why I'm highlighting this is just to highlight some of the things that the NFL does that don't get as much publicity, but could later on impact some of the things that the NFL does. So I'm actually going to start from the bottom of this list. I can talk, I promise. So one of the things that the NFL is doing in association with the Super Bowl is that they're going to have a Pride Night. And so that's exactly what it sounds like. It's going to be a night of Gay Pride during Super Bowl week. It's hosted in association with, so I'm trying to bring up the information to make sure I don't misinform y'all. So it's hosted in association with GLAD, which is a nonprofit organization focused on LGBTQ plus advocacy. And so that's going to happen the Wednesday before the Super Bowl on February 7th. It's going to be in Vegas. There's going to be a red carpet. There's going to be coverage across CBS Sports. So it sounds like it's kind of a big deal. It's sponsored by Smirnoff and everything. So it's one of those things that they haven't really publicized, but it's definitely something that they're making a big deal about. Now, ultimately, what their goal is in terms of, sometimes when people talk about the support of the LGBTQ plus community, they're like, oh, all these organizations have an ulterior motive. I couldn't tell you what it is. A lot of times when I say that something in sports doesn't make sense, so you got to follow the money, it's pretty clear. But this is one of those situations where it's like, there isn't really anywhere to follow the money to. So maybe it is sincere. Maybe it has something to do with some sort of other partnership or funding that they're getting. I don't know, but it is a thing that's happening. And they actually have a whole list of events that they're doing around the time of the Super Bowl that are associated with various causes and other community events. So I'm gonna read some of the most major ones to y'all. So there's the Crucial Catch, which has to do with cancer awareness. There's a gun violence prevention education training. There's a Salute to the Veterans event. There's an Inspire Change Barbershop Books event that's sponsored by Microsoft. There's also going to be a Pride Flag Football Community Clinic. There is the NFL Unsung Hero Celebration. There's the HBCU Legacy Celebration. So it's a whole host of things. So yeah, shout out to the NFL for being partnered with this community. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is, quick side note, flag football. That was one of the things that I really didn't mention. So the NFL is having the International Youth Flag Football game at the Pro Bowl. I think that's at the Pro Bowl. Yeah, at the 2024 Pro Bowl in Orlando. So they are going to have flag football events associated with the Super Bowl, but then there's also this big event that's associated with the Pro Bowl. So that was one of the things that I really kind of looked at as one of the ways that the NFL is trying to I guess, keep a hold on not only tackle football, but football as a whole. Because one of the questions people ask about flag football, especially when it comes to big events like this, is like, okay, is there a chance that flag football could erase or take over tackle football, especially when you consider some of the rule changes that are being made? So, yes and no. I really do think that the NFL's involvement with flag football is more of a long game play as opposed to something that they expect to really pay off immediately. So, for example, the flag football being put in the Olympics. That could mean big things for the NFL, especially if they're able to get NFL players on the flag football Olympic team. Now, lately, there's been some controversy surrounding that because some people are like, well, we've actually been playing flag football for years. I'm going to be pissed off if some NFL player comes along and just takes my spot because he's a good receiver in the NFL, but has never really played flag football. But it's hard for me, considering everything that the NFL has done in terms of investing in flag football. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario where they don't have a lot of input over how that team is structured. It's going to mean some discussions with the NFLPA and possibly, I'm not sure, but possibly some adjustments to the CBA in order for players to be allowed to train for flag football while they're still under contract with NFL teams. So it should be interesting to see how it all plays out. But the NFL seems to be making more and more investments into flag football, not less and less. Now, when it comes to the future of flag football, which is the reason for all this, a lot of it can be traced back to some recent numbers related to youth participation in tackle football, because youth participation usually is an indicator of future participation. So Project Play did a study for the years 2019 to 2022, and basically for kids aged 13 to 17, participation in football as a whole is decreasing. but it's decreasing faster for tackle football than it is for flag football. So as of 2022, there were 1,363,276 participants in tackle football, but that was a change of negative 7.8% over the past 3 years, or over the previous 3 years. And in flag football, you're looking at 549,508, and that was a change of negative 5.5%. And so this is just in the US. I think worldwide flag football is actually growing. But if you go to even younger, for the same time period, for ages 6 to 12, flag football is actually growing, only up by 0.3%. But to go from negative 5.5% to older kids to a positive 0.3 for younger kids suggests that that number is going to keep going up. And then for tackle football for kids age 6 to 12, you're looking at negative 13.2% for the years 2019 to 2022. So, and then as of 2022, you have more child participants in flag football than in tackle football. It's 1,002,228 compared to only 724,916. So if you're looking at those youngest age groups, it really looks like, in terms of participation and interest, flag football is set to take over. But we're talking about changes and impacts we might not see for 10 to 15 years. So as of right now, nothing to really think about. But in the future, yeah, you can expect some major changes to come to how we watch football, how the sport is played, and what's considered the most popular, honestly. So from there, now we can talk about the Department of Justice joining a lawsuit against the NCAA. Now, this was a really interesting story to me, especially considering that it's draft season. So there's a lot of conversations about like who's eligible and who might want to still stay in school another year, how NIL is affecting what college football players expect in the NFL, so on and so forth. So essentially, what happened, there was a lot that went on legally this past week in terms of the NCAA and NIL and transfer rules. So the lawsuit that the DOJ joined is actually related to transfer rules, but the announcement of them joining that lawsuit actually happened at the same time as the 11th congressional hearing on name, image, and likeness. So that was one of the reasons why it became like a really big deal for those of us who love sports enough to pay attention to stuff like that, because it just kind of felt like a couple of different branches of the government all at the same time were like, okay, we need to get this NCAA situation under control. We need to look at the rules. We need to look at the guidelines. We need to determine what's legal. We need to determine what's fair. We need to do it before the end of the next school year. So essentially, when it comes to the transfer rules, what's happening is the Department of Justice is questioning whether or not the rules make sense based on what the NCAA says that they aim to accomplish. So here's a section from the actual complaint. It says the defendant, NCAA, by and through its officers, directors, employees, agents, or other representatives and its member institutions have entered an illegal agreement to restrain and suppress competition in the relevant markets through the adoption and enforcement of the transfer eligibility rule. Specifically, the NCAA and NCAA member institutions have agreed to unlawfully restrain the ability of Division I college athletes to transfer to other Division I schools without loss of athletic eligibility. In other words, what the Department of Justice is saying, like, hey, y'all trying to keep kids from transferring more than once? Are y'all trying to make them sit out a year if they do transfer that second time? Is not fair. It doesn't help them. It stifles competition, and we actually think it goes against everything that we think is fair and legal. So, and this is in an SI.com article. They said, for consumers, the plaintiffs present that the NCAA's policy serves to, quote, decrease fan interest in a team's season by making popular players ineligible for competition and decreasing a team's competitiveness on game day. Their argument hinges on the assumption that allowing transfers to play would increase parity within the NCAA. In the era of NIL inducements, the schools that are making a killing in the transfer market are often those with the resources to secure top players. To the eyes of sports fans seeing the reality of the transfer portal, the argument highlighted by the plaintiff seems misleading at best. And then something else to consider that comes up later in the complaint is the idea that they said, by enforcing these transfer eligibility rules, they're also hurting these athletes' chances at potential future earnings and hurting their opportunities to compete when they're in their prime. So it's a lot that goes into um, what they're determining to be fair or legal or unfair and illegal. And a lot of it is related to things that sports fans have been saying for a long time. But now just the DOJ has stepped in and basically they're giving a legal basis for saying, hey, this isn't just fan banter anymore. This is actually something that we think we need to step in and take care of. A.T. Carter 22. We'll come back to Dak in a second. Maybe. I got to leave in a second. So, where was I with that? Now, when it comes to that particular section of the lawsuit, the whole idea that stopping players from being able to transfer or making them sit out a year if they do transfer can hurt their potential earnings, that's where the NIL comes into play. And that's one of the things that makes me think that ultimately these two issues are going to have to be solved together. Right now you've got a lawsuit that's addressing transfer rules and you've got Congress that's trying to address NIL. But it really seems like at some point, these two things are going to have to be addressed by the same body and addressed together because of how they impact one another. One of the main reasons that the transfer rules are coming into place is because of how NIL is inducing players to transfer. And so when it comes to Congress and what they're looking at in terms of NIL, they're looking at it from a few different perspectives. One, they're looking at it based on school involvement. Because basically with schools not being involved, sometimes students were being promised something by collectives that the school wasn't necessarily associated with, and then the student would go ahead and transfer, and then all of a sudden the agreement would just disappear or it wouldn't be fulfilled, and it was hard to hold anyone accountable. There's also the employment model, and then there's the question of antitrust protection. And so the biggest issue is the employment model, right? For a long time, people have been saying that college athletes should be considered to be employees. And on its face, that sounds like the way to go, especially when we consider the fact that usually when these discussions come up, it's related to star football players, star basketball players, sometimes baseball players, maybe soccer, who are having their likenesses used on television shows, on jerseys, video games, so on and so forth, and they're not being compensated for it. So from that perspective, it does sound like, yeah, make them employees, pay them. That's the way to go. The issue is when you think of the athletic department of a school as a whole, what would probably happen is that some of the less popular sports, some of the Olympic sports, and some of the women's sports would not receive support at all because they're not bringing in money. So if student athletes were to become employees, schools would have much less incentive to keep those sports around. So basically, to benefit the most popular sports and benefit the most popular athletes, you could be undermining and end up doing away with some of the lesser known sports that are still really important to student athletes and to the student athlete experience and to the athletic experience overall when you consider how many sports are involved in the Olympics and how many people go to like the world games or the world championships of their sport, but we don't hear about them at all in college. You know, we're talking bowlers, we're talking gymnasts, curling, swimmers, track and field, so on and so forth, who could basically have all their support or their program eliminated entirely if employment were to be put on the table. And then specifically when you think about something like Title IX. And so Title IX, most people know it as the legislation that ensures equality between men's and women's sports in college. But there are some specific aspects of it that would basically be nullified if student athletes were to become employees. So, question of what is Title IX? And this is a quote from the Title IX of the Education Amendments Act of 1972. It states, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance," right? And so then one of the main parts of this particular legislation has to do with how institutions are expected to comply and also how they determine what equality is. So when it comes to how institutions are expected to comply, and this is directly from the NCAA website, it says for participation requirements, institution officials must meet one of the following three tests. An institution may provide participation opportunities for women and men that are substantially proportionate to their respective rates of enrollment of full-time undergraduate students, or demonstrate a history and continuing practice of program expansion for the underrepresented sex, or it can fully and effectively accommodate the interests and abilities of the underrepresented sex. And then there's 2 and 3 options. 2 is female and male student athletes must receive athletic scholarship dollars proportional to their participation, and equal treatment of male and female student athletes in the 11 provisions as mentioned above. So basically, you make student athletes employees, you would be eliminating that federal funding that holds schools to these standards. And then when it comes to, what was another question on here? They said, is any sport excluded from Title IX? And it says, under Title IX, there are no sport exclusions or exceptions. Individual participation opportunities in all men's and women's sports are counted in determining whether an institution meets Title IX participation standards. The basic philosophical underpinning of Title IX is that there cannot be an economic justification for discrimination. The institution cannot maintain that there are revenue productions or other considerations that mandate that certain sports receive better treatment or participation opportunities in other sports. So when they say there can't be economic justification, what you'd be doing by making student athletes employees, in other words, confirming that these sports are businesses, is you would be giving these schools economic justification. So as we're thinking about NIL, as we're thinking about these transfer rules, I think it's important that we not only think about the football players and the basketball players, both men and women, but we also have to think about women's sports and some of these underrepresented sports and how they'll be impacted. Now, considering how long it's taking Congress and the Department of Justice and everybody else involved to figure out exactly how this should all play out, I'm pretty positive that they're thinking about these things. I'm pretty positive that they're thinking about the smaller sports. They're thinking about Title IX, all of that. But that's also what makes it complicated. I'm definitely in favor of athletes getting fair compensation, but I don't want to see a small percentage of athletes get fair compensation at the cost of eliminating programs entirely for other athletes. So it's going to be a tricky situation. But something else to point out about this is that pretty much any major sports league goes through this phase where things are kind of messy, especially when it comes to legality and logistics. The NFL went through it. When it was formed, it was 2 different organizations, neither of which was making enough money. They came together to minimize costs and get more revenue. The UFL, which is the XFL and USFL combined, they recently did the same thing. They said, hey, we're going to combine so that we aren't duplicating resources or competing with each other. This way we can minimize costs. We can make a bigger profit together. The NBA was formed in a very similar way. The biggest difference with the NCAA is that there's already so much money wrapped into this. They're not in a situation where they have to make changes to figure out how to make money. They're like, yo, we were cool with the status quo. We were getting money and lots of it. And now you want us to, consider the rights and what these students are owed and what they should be able to do with their own name, image, and likeness. We haven't done that for decades. So that's a big issue for a lot of people who are currently in charge. That's one of the issues that you hear about a lot of the coaches having, who say that, they don't really want to coach in the NCAA anymore. And it's because the way that they recruit, the way that they retain, the way that they interact with players, all of that has had to change, basically because of student athletes getting the same ability that they've had all along, which was to go where they can get the most money and to not have to wait this whole 1-year waiting period in order to do it. So it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out, especially considering the fact that a lot of this is going to have a benefit on a lot of young Black athletes. And unfortunately, in America, that does make a difference. So I'll be keeping an eye on it. And of course, if there's anything to report, I'll be back here to talk about it with you guys. JV says, I don't side with the NCAA. JV, for the most part, I don't either. They don't have an academic basis for a lot of rules that they make. But I think the biggest problem that I'm struggling with right now is the fact that even though there's no academic basis, because of rules like Title IX and other ways that their funding helps other student athletes, it's hard to remove the NCAA entirely without there being some collateral damage on the part of student athletes who, quite frankly, don't deserve to have to go through that. So I don't side with the NCAA, but I do think it'll be up to the NCAA to come up with a creative solution on how to fix this. I know I've joked before about getting rid of the NCAA entirely, and I do think that time might come eventually, but I don't think it's going to come before they figure out a solution for this and a system that works and makes sense for everybody. So I don't side with them as they currently stand, but I do hope that ultimately they win, in the sense that I hope that the people who are really on the side of student athletes do figure out something that will work for all student athletes. So that's all I got. Like I said, I got to get out of here, got to get to work. I'll be putting out some more content over the weekend and going live next week. When I do finally figure out a day to go live, it probably will be around this time, like 5 or 6. I just don't know which day. My schedule keeps changing. I keep having clients who want to jump around. But I do think regardless of what day it is, even if the day changes, I do think, around 5 or 6 is around the time that I should be able to stick to, even if it ends up being a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday. So I know there's some cool Twitter spaces going on. So check out Twitter and hop into that. And I'm head out to work, and I'll see y'all next time. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Bitches Love Sports. Y'all have a good night.